In this fifth part of our series, we'll now have a discussion to obtain some insight into the Eastern Christian churches and their life in the contemporary world. And so we'll attempt to provide some insight into the current state of affairs of various Eastern Christian churches. However, as was the case of the Byzantine Empire, please keep in mind as we do this that the status of Eastern churches in contemporary times is rather fluid and constantly changing. Also, in an attempt to provide a bridge of understanding between East and West, Orthodoxy and Catholicism, we will comment on both the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Eastern Catholic churches, which in many instances are mirror images of an Orthodox counterpart, one group in communion with the Patriarch of Constantinople, one group within the communion of the Catholic churches headed by the Bishop of Rome. The Eastern Orthodox Church is made up of some 14 autocephalous or self-headed or self-governing churches. Amongst these are 4 of the ancient patriarchates: Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem. Other churches are headed by the new patriarchates of Moscow, Serbia, Romania and Bulgaria, the majority of whose populations are Orthodox. They are not new patriarchates. 3 other churches belong to this early group, going back even to Byzantine times. These are the Church of Greece, today governed by a primate and synod, the Church of Cyprus, and the very ancient and much persecuted Church of Georgia, whose head is the Catholicos Patriarch of Georgia. 3 other churches, though linked to other centres of authority and administration, are also autocephalous. These are the churches of Albania, Poland and the Czech Republic, where the Orthodox are a significant minority in the total population. In Ukraine, recently politically independent of Russia, the situation is even more complicated, with 3 competing Orthodox jurisdictions, each claiming the right to be the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. One more or less aligned with Constantinople, one with Moscow, and one claiming an independent Patriarchate of Kiev. In the United States, an autocephalous church exists called the Orthodox Church of America, which was granted its self-governance by the Patriarchate of Moscow, but which is somewhat disputed by other patriarchates of the Orthodox world. Other Orthodox jurisdictions also have faithful parishes and in some cases bishops in America, which makes for many overlapping and sometimes competing situations. Other large Orthodox populations, such as in Australia and Canada, are not separate churches, but are linked to older centres of orthodoxy. The Greek Orthodox Church in Australia, for example, with some 700,000 people in 1995, is part of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, as is the United States, Canada and Great Britain. The tiniest Orthodox church, the tiniest of all, is the autocephalous monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai, with fewer than 100 faithful. The structure and organisation of the Orthodox Church is not utterly fixed. History has shown us that it has a capacity for development in accord with circumstances, with needs and times. In the new countries, the future may show a uniting of jurisdictions to form a single jurisdiction, and there are moves in this direction in the United States, where the Orthodox Church of America and the jurisdictions of other Orthodox churches who have a presence there are discussing creating one American church. Using American English as its language of worship and preaching, they seek to pursue a more indigenous orthodoxy suitable to the new situation. Although such a course presents enormous difficulties and dangers, this must be the direction of the future in the new lands. When the Byzantine liturgy prays for the well-being of the holy churches of God and the union of all, it does not, in the first instance, mean the large organisational units. The Holy Church of God is the diocese, the faithful gathered around its bishop. This is the irreducible unit of the Church. The pastoral and practical needs of each diocese are ministered to in the parishes of the diocese by priests and deacons placed amongst the people by the bishop. Most of these parochial clergy are married men in the East. The bishop, however, is never married in these times. The bishops are all each other's equal. So are the churches, whether ancient or new. As one would expect, the situation of the Orthodox Church in the modern world shares many common features with that of the Catholic Church. It also has some unique features, challenges and difficulties, which we will shortly consider. As for the development of mutual understanding between Catholics and Orthodox, one must note a certain lopsidedness. The Orthodox are very critical and attentive to developments in Catholic pastoral practice, but they know very little of Catholic theology. Catholics are almost the reverse. A keen interest in Eastern Christian theology and patristics is much in evidence, but knowledge of Eastern Christian pastoral practice is woefully poor. These imbalances need to be rectified if the churches are to face the future together. The international Orthodox Catholic dialogue at present being conducted may go a long way towards this rectification. On the level of theological life, the Orthodox world faces a number of urgent but related tasks. There is a deep need for an authentic return to the mind of the fathers of the Church. The Church must relearn to reflect and act with the mind of patristic tradition. The fathers need to speak to the whole Church once again. Their thoughts, especially their homiletics, need to be made accessible through modern translations and form the basis for all lay activity, both spiritual growth and for social involvement. In order to do this, the Church must study, using tools of modern scholarship, that wealth of patristic tradition, and not just selected fathers, such as those of the desert. The training of Orthodox theologians needs to proceed from the outcome of this deepened study by Orthodox for Orthodox, and not from foreign models from outside the Orthodox tradition. Those who articulate the faith need to be formed by tradition and be less given to the shallow and fruitless habit of cribbing from and reacting to non-Orthodox traditions. At the level of pastoral life, the matter of a renewed understanding of the fathers is again crucial. A return to the fathers is not an escape from the problems of contemporary society, since the fundamental theme of patristic theology is omnia omnibus, all things to all men, that they might be saved. For this reason, only such a return can counteract the heresy of viewing the Church as an alternative or supplementary to secular society, and reveal the full responsibility of her mission to make all things new again. This has everything to do with the Orthodox churches in the diaspora, where the Church has so far played largely, a maintenance role within ethnic groups. In this situation, the Orthodox Church really needs to find a prophetic, patristic theology so that it might live anew in the new lands. As one Orthodox theologian recently stated, diaspora is not a curse, potentially it's a blessing. It is not a predicament, it is an honour. It is not an exile. Theologically, it's a return to the world, and the entire world is the Lord's. So the Orthodox Church faces the double task of articulating an ecclesiology that reflects the diversity of social and political situations in which she now finds herself, such as the diaspora and the anti-Christian postmodern Western world. But the Church must also reject pseudo-ecclesiology, which is to say, one based on any person, thing or idea which is not Jesus Christ. The Church also faces the immense task of reassessing her structure, patriarch, diocese or parish, in the light of intense urbanisation and depersonalisation in modern society. In the same reassessment, the Church may need to rediscover the correct role of the monastic life in the Church, which is perhaps Orthodoxy's greatest glory, while at the same time rejecting any idea of the monastery as peripheral to Christian reality on the one hand, or as constituting a church within a church on the other. As for the Catholic Church, the 20th century presents a great challenge to the Orthodox Church of the East. The very challenge is an invitation to follow the commands of her divine master and spouse, for whom she waits with great expectation and with joy. And now let's turn to some discussion of the Eastern Catholic churches, those mirror images. of Eastern Orthodoxy. There are a number of communities of Byzantine Christians who are in communion with the Roman See. Once they were referred to as rites, but since Vatican II and in more recent recognition of their self-governing nature, the more proper reference today is that they are churches in communion with the See of Rome. Some never really left it, others returned, others were more or less invented by the Roman Church. They are most often called uniate churches, those in union, by the Orthodox, although this term is today considered somewhat derogatory and no longer used, especially in ecumenical circles. The two largest of these churches are the Ukrainian Catholics, headed by an Archbishop Major in Lviv, Ukraine, and the Melkite Greek Catholic Church of Antioch, headed by the Catholic Patriarch of Antioch, at present Patriarch Gregory III, currently residing in Damascus, Syria. Both churches have communities in most of the major English-speaking countries, as well as in their own original lands. Other Eastern Catholic churches include the Greek Church of Sicily in South Italy, a survivor of Byzantine days, also called the Italo-Greek Church, the Ruthenian Byzantine Catholics of the Carpathian Mountains, with a metropolitan in the United States and several eparchies in Eastern Europe, and the very small, the very tiny Russian Catholic Church. The Russian Catholics only have a few communities, but they are located in cities outside of Russia, mostly, in places such as New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco and Melbourne. Neither the Roman Catholics, the Orthodox, nor historical circumstances have treated these churches very kindly. The Romans have more or less constantly interfered in their customary style of life and with their liturgical traditions, while the Orthodox heartily dislike them, seeing them as dupes of Roman imperialism, created to lure away the unwary Orthodox faithful into Roman obedience. They have also suffered historical catastrophes, such as followed the 1917 revolution in Russia, the Ottoman oppression in the Middle East, and exile from their homelands precipitated by World War II. In spite of all, they have continued to exist adhering to Rome more or less to their Byzantine traditions. Despite the Latinization of many, there is no question that the Orthodox Church is the mother church of the Eastern Catholics. Reintegration with her must be their final goal and is recognised by many of their clergy and hierarchs. The task is fearsomely difficult. They must both strive to return to the mother church, but without losing communion with Rome. They stand at the very heart of East-West reunion, and given enough charity and courage, these Eastern Catholics could become the cup in Benjamin's sack, so to speak, drawing the estranged brothers to self-disclosure and reunion. Their existence need not continue to be an unmovable obstacle to unity, but that is the light in which they have been cast up to the present. Given the state of the Eastern Catholic churches, one could despair of their being equal to the task. There are serious internal divisions, some parties desiring to adhere to the entirety of their Eastern traditions, opposing other factions who favour Westernisation. If they are to succeed in their highest purpose, these groups must come to an understanding on a higher level. Providence may intend them to witness to Catholicism and to Orthodoxy, showing both that there is room in a true unity of Christ's Church for two legitimate expressions of the one faith. Among the Roman Catholics, they must defend, to the brink of schism if necessary, the legitimate claims of Eastern theology, church life and spirituality. They must reject all encroachment upon the ancient rights and dignity of the East, such as the celibacy laws for clergy. If they fail, the Orthodox will never be convinced that such pressures would not be applied to them in a reunited church. There are signs of hope. Most Catholics would not realise that one of the sources of Vatican II's new directions in many matters to do with the Church, such as the emphasis upon collegiality, came from the East, through the indefatigable efforts of the great Melkite Patriarch Maximus IV of Antioch, and also fellow Eastern Catholic bishops at the Council. Other documents recently promulgated by the Bishop of Rome, especially the Apostolic Letter Orientale Lumen and Ut Unum Sint, both written in 1995, give even fuller encouragement to these Eastern churches in communion with the See of Rome to fulfil their destiny and provide that bridge between Christian East and West. Let's now talk for a moment about the matter of the reunion of the church. That communion between the churches was lost and is still a goal for the future is the result of unfortunate historical experiences. That in many cases the churches can barely manage open countenance goodwill towards each other is resistance to the Holy Spirit. There can be little doubt that the churches of the Catholic tradition, that is, Roman Orthodox and non-Chalcedonian Orthodox, fundamentally conceive of God, the economy of salvation, and God's operation in the world in a consonant way. But historical circumstances forced them apart and denied them the opportunity to appreciate each other's faith. They deepened their ignorance of the cultural milieu which conditioned each sister church's faith and theological outlook. The will to understand was further weakened by the contacts that they did have, such as to establish what was almost an inexorable pattern in their relationships. As mutual ignorance, strangeness, and positive misunderstanding deepened, further contact produced only conditioned responses ranging from a lack of will for reunion to an implacable hatred. It is the task of modern ecumenism, genuine ecumenism, to break the power of the conditioned response. To understand why so many of our contemporary endeavours make such little progress must be approached with some understanding of this past. The many memories of unpleasant experiences, as well as more than 1,000 years of separation, have imposed upon ecumenical dialogue a diplomatic model. Now, while this model may be suitable for the ordering of the affairs and relationships of nation-states, it is not entirely appropriate as a procedure in the search for the reunion of the Church. The use of the diplomatic model reinforces habits, assumptions and reactions which are perhaps inappropriate. It may be that the diplomatic model is incapable of pointing to the features of the kingdom of God. It may well be that it is actually antithetical to the kingdom and its ethos, which is an atmosphere conditioned by grace and founded on love. The churches must begin to think and to act as much as is possible as those who already belong together, whose role is nothing less than the new ordering of the cosmos. Precisely because the church is the vessel of salvation, truth, and the Christian mysteries, reunion is paramount with particular urgency. In facing the facts of the signs of the times and the lateness of the hour, the churches must appear in their role as the eschatological sign in the world. But as any Christian with some knowledge of ecumenical history knows, unions entered into on the grounds of emergency can create more ecumenical damage than good. Why would anything have changed today when the past shows that unions of this sort, conceived in situations governed by fear, did violence to the truth? Such reservations are serious, but the circumstances of the 20th and 21st century have so altered that these reservations may now have a chance of being satisfied. The negotiations for a union between East and West in the late Middle Ages were so coloured by politics that the union was almost a forced union. This was the criticism levelled by the faithful laity of the Orthodox at the bishops and emperor after the Union Council of Florence. It is obvious that the strained circumstances of the empire, as well as the possibility of Western assistance, were to the forefront of the negotiators' minds. But this is not to charge them with hypocrisy. They doubtless believed in the union. However, it is important to realise that this situation cannot recur in anything like the same way as it did at the Council of Florence. The chief reason why it cannot recur is to be found in the changed circumstances of all the churches who are either direct participants or represented by some other arrangement. The significant change is that None of these churches any longer identifies itself exclusively with the interests, principles, or survival of any particular political system or ideology. In the West, the Catholic Church is now an array of local churches whose existence was not dreamed of at Florence. Even the papacy has more or less been detached from its place as a quasi-kingdom and secular power amongst the countries of Western Europe. Much the same is true of the East. No thinking churchman or layman amongst the Greeks would claim that the survival of the church was the same thing as the survival of the state, or that the union of church and state was indispensable as the church's guarantee of survival. Though content to mentally identify Hellenism with orthodoxy in the everyday functioning of the church, and often much to the annoyance of other Orthodox, the same equation would not be made in extremis. The Catholic Church has been forced to rethink its relationship to secular society by the secularist movements and ideologies which sprang from the whole nexus of ideas, dreams and conditions and outcomes surrounding 1789 and the revolution it initiated. Most of the Orthodox, in one of those ironical historical situations, were largely untouched. Catholicism took much of the cultural shock. Only echoes of the thunder reached Ottoman Greece, Tsarist Russia, the Ottoman territories in Asia Minor, Palestine or Egypt. The equivalent events, which have begun to change orthodoxy, came much later and cluster around and proceed from the outcome of events in Russia in 1917. Both of the great families of churches are now faced with intellectual, moral and spiritual challenges and issues in a wider world at a level of complexity not dreamed of even 100 years ago. The situation of the age makes it doubly urgent that the churches of the East and of the West seriously set out to find each other in a situation largely more free of the national interests which once bedeviled the search for union. The sheer scale of the difficulties, dangers, promises and dreams of the 20th and 21st century increases the scandal of Orthodox Catholic disunity. The whole of Christ's Church must speak with a united voice to a planet now in danger of destruction. In the face of such great dangers to mankind, and with the spectre of secularized Pelagianism standing behind the thinking of the materialist systems of both capitalism and Marxism, in the face of poverty, injustice, and the multiplying threats to human life, even from conception and before natural death, according to God's will, as well as the other host of spiritual needs and ills that plead for Christ's compassion, the rehearsing of offences and prejudices from a vanished past appears not a little precious to the watching world. So how do we begin to understand one another? Here is some advice for the interested Catholic. What are Catholics faced with when they attempt to seek some form of friendly contact with the Orthodox Church? First of all, there is no simple body that is the Orthodox Church. If the Orthodox wish to initiate ecumenical contact with Catholics in, say, Melbourne or New York, they can approach the body headed by the city's Roman Catholic bishop. It doesn't work like that the other way around. There are many jurisdictions of the Orthodox Church. In Australia, for example, there is one Greek, two Antiochian, one Romanian, two Serbian, one Macedonian, two Ukrainian, two Bulgarian, and two Russian jurisdictions. All call themselves Orthodox. All use the same ritual in their services. All have the same ethos. But language, politics, and history of computation of the calendar have divided them. I use an Australian example here, but the situation is even more complicated in the United States and in Canada. There is a plethora of jurisdictions, so where could the Catholic begin? Some jurisdictions would be quite delighted if a Catholic or a group of Catholics attended a service, such as the Easter Vigil, the Matins of Holy Pascha. Others would not be so welcoming. Some would be puzzled. In one or two parishes, a Catholic might even encounter quiet hostility. This is not a very good method of gaining ecumenical contact. Here I will suggest another method, after we have looked a little more closely at the difficulties. You see, Catholics might be anxious to establish some ecumenical contact with orthodoxy, but are the Orthodox equally desirous of discovering you? Well, not really. The Orthodox view of the Catholic is still very much conditioned by the past. They still feel the past as present, and in the minds of many, clergy and theologians in particular, those past events are still sour in the memory. Allowing official dialogue between the churches to follow its course amongst the hierarchs and theologians, the individual and interested Catholic should follow in a different style. I think it's best to make a friend amongst the Orthodox. Break the ice with your neighbours, at the same time taking the trouble to read something of the doctrinal tradition and the history of Orthodoxy. And then, through your friend and your study, you might have a better chance of beginning to understand and to feel something of their feeling. At this point, you can venture to a church. But go with your friend. You will not feel anywhere near as awkward and out of place if you begin like this. Go under their wing, so to speak. Let them guide you. Only when steps like this have been taken will the Catholic person avoid being a liturgical voyeur or a nuisance. It also seems to be that those who begin by visiting a church soon find that their interest wanes once their curiosity has been satisfied. The language of the Eastern services, the distinct style of worship, and the devotional attitudes of the East are difficult to understand for anyone of the West. Without the friend and serious reading, the Catholic may altogether fail to see the basic unity of belief and practice which, though hidden, link the Catholic and the Orthodox believer. A little more information on further things that you might encounter may help. In the Russian churches, you will find Orthodox worship at its most traditional and observant. The music helps the Catholic believer to feel a little more at home. It is nearest to the style and singing of the West. I don't mean present-day Catholic popular music, of course. Rather, it's influenced by 19th century German church music. This may be the reason that non-Orthodox most easily fall into step, so to speak, in a Russian church. It is still a little exotic, but not too bizarre and unfamiliar. The Russians, on the other hand, may be none too friendly. The churches of the Patriarchate of Antioch, while almost always open and friendly to Catholics, present a wildly unfamiliar appearance and sound to the timid visitor. Their language in liturgy is Arabic, and none too familiar to other Western Christians. Even the Greek style is only slightly less foreign. Superficially, the singing is similar to the Arabic singing of the Church of Antioch. It's sung in the old Byzantine tones, while the stance of the congregation is a little bit more ordered and tidy. Many Greek churches now have pews, but it is still very strange to the outsider. As for the Serbian and Macedonian churches, both Slavic churches whose homelands and headquarters are today in modern Serbia and the Macedonian Republic, these are a strange mixture of the dignified and ordered Russian performance of the church services, but with more than an echo of their Hellenic neighbours' melodies, giving an almost oriental touch to the way they sing. All these multiple styles, various as the human frame and wondrously made, have arisen from often tumultuous theological and cultural political history, and they are now scattered throughout the diaspora. In the longer term, they cannot but fail to enrich the new countries. Since the schism between the East and the West, both sides have suffered from the absence of the other. Both sides limp, as it were. The East lacks something of Western pragmatism, while the West lacks something of their holistic response to the Christian mystery. The East is more Trinitarian in its theological framework. For them, the incarnation flows from that fact. The West is somewhat Christocentric, with its incarnational response stepping off from the human figure of Jesus Christ. While it is very important not to create a hybrid strain of Oriental and Occidental Christianity, Western Christians stand to gain great insight into the life of the gospel teaching by an open-minded approach to the apostolic Christianity of the Byzantine tradition. The distant scene, which is the possible reuniting of the estranged triplets, must be left to God's providence. Worldwide ecumenical activity involving theologians and bishops and perhaps many centuries may bring this about. The local scene is also part of this greater spiritual movement, and our relations with neighbouring Eastern Christians can help us to see into the full depths of our own tradition while providing a preparation ground for mutual understanding. The new countries, particularly the United States, Canada and Australia, are ideally placed for this work. Now we know that to look constantly to the past is not to be whole in the present. But never to look to the past is to cast no shadow. Among the churches, the first only creates a bitter sterility. The second creates a church with no mysteries or any compelling beauty. Consequently, the future of the churches can only be founded upon an appreciation of the common Catholic and Orthodox, that is to say, universal and right-believing past, admiration for the particular past of each church, and a loving attention to each other in the present. The real causes of the schism are to be found in human failure. Being caused by sins against love, only love can restore the Christian world to visible unity. The search for unity cannot therefore be a matter for the conference table or at the level of the hierarchy alone. If this love is not to be abstract, it must arise amongst the peoples and be both broad and specific. If the Catholic Church began to put its heart into serving the East without ulterior motives, treating the Eastern Christians in our midst as brethren with the same rights and inheritance, the response of the Spirit of God would not be slow. And if this series has achieved anything of its purpose, it should be clear that the East would not come empty-handed to this feast of love, to this agape. Let us move to some concluding remarks. In 1958, the deeply hostile silence between the churches of Rome and Constantinople and the East in general was broken by Pope John the 23rd and Patriarch Athenagoras I. Since then, the churches have been engaged progressively in what has come to be called the dialogue of love. At first sight, this appears to be a collection of courteous speeches and gestures between the representatives of the two churches on mutual feast days and other occasions. However, closer examination of the exchanges in the dialogue of love demonstrate that a common vision of the mystery of the Church, of sacramental and dogmatic life, is shared between the two churches, though expressed in many forms. The dialogue of love does not need the international theological dialogue to confirm the fact that at the deepest and most substantial level of ecclesial life, the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches are still the one Holy Catholic Church of the Creed of the Councils of Constantinople Nicaea. The briefest sample of the material of the dialogue makes this clear. Patriarch Demetrius I declared that his church and the church of the Bishop of Rome are servants of the two great related mysteries, the mysteries of the Holy Eucharist and the mystery of the Church. He acknowledged the underlying oneness and the unbroken mystical unity of the Eastern and Western churches. And while sin and a painful and alienating history may have divided the churches, they now meet on the brink of the mystery of the Holy Eucharist, on the brink of the mystery of the Church. They were his words from the Feast of St. Andrew in 1983. Each of the churches lives the mystery of Eucharist and Church and are on the brink of living this together. The language of the dialogue is also significant. When speaking of these things, the Patriarch's speech is full of great feeling. It is language, not words. Citing the Scriptures, his language acquires a tone of heartbreak, indicating that it comes from the deepest conviction. Patriarch Demetrius, in that same speech in November 1983, declared, "With humility and nostalgia for the undivided state of the early Church, not putting our confidence in ourselves," citing 2 Corinthians chapter 1, "we ask the Founder and Lord of the Church, of that church which he had acquired by the price of his own blood, citing Acts 20, to have pity and guide us to do his will, and so become one, citing John chapter 17. Pope John Paul II took up the theme and was impatient of relations remaining at a formal diplomatic level. The union must be an I-thou relationship that prevails between the churches. This is an immense challenge, which of course runs counter to the spirit that motivates both ethnic exclusiveness or universalist pretensions. The personal meetings, as the Pope explained, took on a sense of vivid flesh and blood reality, which exchanges of letters, valuable as they are, cannot adequately match. He said that in June, on the Feast of the Apostles Peter and Paul in 1982. The actual circumstances of the dialogue matter enormously. It could not be clearer that the dialogue of love understands itself as God's work, as the work of the Spirit. Consequently, to resist the dialogue amounts almost to a kind of blasphemy against the indwelling Spirit in the Church. This is not to say that the spirit of frankness and legitimate criticism is not welcome, or that difficulties are to be simply glossed over. But when criticism and frankness are expressed, they should be governed by love and not offered in the spirit of polemics or hatred. Pope John Paul II said that there is, quote, a deep and mysterious communion which gathers us together around our Lord, that such meetings can happen, again in June 1982. There is a pre-existing indwelling presence of Christ and the Spirit in both churches. This is the source of the dialogue, its foundation. The dialogue, therefore, is not trying to reinvent the church. Rather, it appropriates what is already present, and it strives to resolve whatever impairs unity and fullness of communion. Again, in June 1982, the Pope continued, he is present in his church according to his promise, which is Matthew 28, and he incorporates us into himself in a unity which belongs to the order of mystery and which no hostile power can destroy. This is an echo of that great declaration of Patriarch Demetrios on the unbreakable brotherhood of the churches. The Patriarch declared, "Who can break up brotherhood? No one and nothing. Brotherhood survives the passage of centuries and survives even the temporary separation of brother from brother." Clearly, we must give up the idea that this dialogue of love yields little for theology. So much more advanced than we imagine, this dialogue of love is deeply theological and is an actual and organic part of the theological dialogue itself. Having first uncovered the deep ground of unity upon which the churches mystically stand, it contains or anticipates almost all of the matters for investigation by the theological dialogue itself. At the present moment, the churches have completed what we might call their first entrance, the Isados of the dialogue of love. As Cardinal Willibrance put it, evoking the theme of entrance, it remains to be reconciled and to go forward together to offer our sacrifice. And so, the churches are now part way through their great entrance, their second Isados of the dialogue of theology. This somewhat turbulent dialogue of theology is again moving to its successful completion because, as the texts of the dialogue of love reveal, those making the great entrance are truly accompanied by the Church militant and triumphant, even of the Holy Trinity. By way of conclusion, I'd like to cite something which for me is very personal and a personal symbol in some ways from the Scriptures, mirroring the journey of the churches into the life of God. It comes from the Old Testament. 1,000 years before the birth of our Lord, two widows, one a Hebrew and the other her Moabite daughter-in-law, made their entrance-like journey together from the plains of Moab to the land of Judah. For me, they are symbolic of the Eastern and Western churches in their search and pilgrimage to the God of Israel. May the churches in dialogue in their journey together to Christ, the Lord of the harvest, make the widow's oath their own. Ruth, turning to Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, as east might say to west, and west to east, "Do not press me to leave you, and to turn back from your company. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I shall be buried. May the Lord do this thing to me, and more also, if even death should come between us."